I am Isabella. I remember the exact shape of his laugh the first time I heard it. The way it began polite like a practice thing, then opened into something feral when he thought no one was watching. That laugh used to be my sun. It warmed everything around it until one day it burned me. His name is Adam Moreau. He is handsome in the lazy, expensive way of men who know they can buy the world and bend it to their taste. Tailored jackets, an accent that moved like honey across vowels, a job in finance that smelled of money and vacation photos. We met at a gallery opening, 2 glasses of white wine and a wrong-sided conversation about a painting neither of us liked. He told me my scowl was dangerous, as if danger had been a compliment. I let it be one. For 3 years Adam taught me to enjoy the polished surfaces of life. Dinners at places that required reservations 2 weeks in advance, plane tickets printed with first-class seats, weekends in tiny villas along the coast. He taught me how to laugh at people who argued for ordinary things, like loyalty, as if they had never seen the world sell itself in bright, convincing wrappers. He called me Isa in private, which sounded like a permission slip to be soft. He called me Isabella in public, which was the name he wrote on cards when he wanted to sound formal. He was good at everything that looked good. He was terrible at everything that did not. I am not the type who storms out with threats and high-heeled fury. When the betrayal happened, I did not throw things. I made lists. I wrote dates on a small spiral notebook I carried in my purse like a talisman. The first time was a lunch he said was work. It was a Thursday. He kissed me in the kitchen when he left at 8, promising to bring home something for dinner. He never returned. He came back late, full of excuses, with that practiced expression of guilt that had the outline of rehearsed remorse. I felt something inside me settle into a new shape I did not like. Suspicion is an insect that hums. I began to hear it all the time. The second time was a photograph. I found it months later, accidentally, in a cloud album he thought I did not have permission to view. His hand rested at the small of a woman named Livia's back. Livia's hair was sun-bleached. Her smile had teeth like a secret. Adam's eyes in the photo looked at Livia like a man who had found the exact flavor he wanted and was not willing to share it. He looked at me in the same way sometimes, like I was one of many good investments. I should say, here and now, I did not kill him. That turns stories into pulp and ruins the slow, gnawing pleasure of a smarter triumph. I wanted him to feel the things I felt. Shame, confusion, the slow realization that everything he had considered secure was not. I wanted him to dismantle himself by his own hands, under the weight of a careful and inescapable truth. So I began to record. Not with hidden cameras or stalkerish feeds. Those things would have been cheap. I became a collector of small evidences. Hotel receipts with names I did not know, lipstick-stained coffee cups in the trash on mornings when he said he had no meetings, the precise time he left a conversation via text and the chain of minutes between that time and the next time his heart was distracted. I learned his schedule like a second language. He was meticulous but predictable. An advantage. Men who wear control like armor are often lazy about the details nobody asks for. The plan was not, cannot be, born from singular rage. It was architecture. I spent weeks sketching its bones on napkins, on the back of takeout menus at 2 a.m., on the margins of novels I pretended to read. It had to be elegant, baroque in its patience. The best revenge is a system where your adversary collapses because he cannot locate the fault line. He cannot see where pressure will come from because the pressure is everywhere. I started with Livia. Not because she was an enemy. She was a woman with soft hands who probably thought she had found a man. She was an innocent in a sense. She loved the thrill of being chosen by a man who could offer her a small private life of glamour. I recognized the look. Once it had been mine. I did not want to hurt her in her bones. I wanted her to be turned, if anything, into a mirror that showed Adam the ugliness he preferred to ignore. I sent Livia a message. I crafted it with the care of a letterpress artisan. I opened with kindness. I told her in plain sisterly tones, what she would likely want to know but not hear. That Adam dated other women, that he loved a certain kind of applause more than a single heart. I did not accuse, I did not shout. I simply offered truth. You deserve to know, I wrote, and I meant it. Her reply was a storm. I watched as she oscillated between holy indignation and wounded devotion. She asked me for proof. I sent a photograph I had staged, one that was carefully cropped and vague, enough to seed suspicion without revealing my hand. She thanked me for the honesty and asked to meet. I agreed. At the cafe, She arrived with an air of someone riding a clothesline of nerves. She wanted to forgive, to salvage, to maintain a softness at the center. Adam called her an hour later to cancel. He claimed an urgent client dinner. Livia looked at the phone as if it had betrayed her. She left, and I watched her go with a guilt that was not quite regret. I had to stoke the fire without lighting the whole house. Next, I took the small things that make people visible to institutions, to reputations. Adam's career was built on perception. The right clients, the right deals, the right smile at the right charity event. I began to whisper into that machine. I found an old story. In the way of all men who play with loyalty, there were small skeletons in his closet. There had been a hedge fund he had recommended to friends who lost money the way small towns lose their young. Quickly and with a kind of permanent hush. He had been promoted after that, because the firm needed someone to pretend that mistakes were absent. I found a whistleblower, an analyst who had been let go around the same time. She owed me nothing, only a small owed kindness for a favor I had once done. She told me everything, not with bitterness but with a kind of weary clarity. She had records. I fed those records gently into the world. Not through a single channel, but through a braided sequence. An anonymous tip to a financial blog that liked scandal. A pointed forward to an investigative journalist I knew from university days who liked puzzles. An offhand comment to a partner of Adam's that I ran into at a gallery opening. Innocuous, like a stone tossed to test the water. Each whisper was calibrated. My goal was to create a pattern, not a flash. People believe in momentum. If a rumor arrives with friends and proof, it stops being rumor. There were nights I almost tasted the end. When his hand would reach for mine and I would not pull away. When he would look at me with a hopeful, exhausted sincerity and ask if I was all right. I lied. I smiled just enough. I let him see a version of me he could afford. In public I was the model partner. Graceful complaints, appreciative nods. Because nothing offends a man who thinks he owns all narratives like public humiliation. I kept my coldness private. Revenge is intimate. The first fracture came as a slow thing that social media did to his neat facade. A thread on an industry forum. Oblique, but designed to be noticed, named names. Due diligence, it read, in a way that made the missing pieces louder than the words. Adam brushed it away at first. Pride does that thing men do. Pride thinks one's reflection cannot be cracked. He gave interviews like anchors tie knots. Tight, tidy. Then the journalist from my life, Lena, the one who liked puzzles, published a piece that did not say he had cheated, but asked honest questions about his client relationships, about anomalous asset allocations, and conflicts of interest. The firm called him in. He argued. The firm showed him the door. He blamed someone else at first, a partner, a data glitch. He called me from the office bathroom, voice small, the practiced smile gone. They're trying to make an example, he said. I sat and listened like a therapist at 2 a.m. while he poured out panic. I offered small consolations. Warmth, the idea of reconstructing the narrative. He was certain he would be exonerated, that a good reputation was an unbreakable shield. Men like him lived inside that certainty. Revenge does not always come in the form of exposure. It also lives in the daily erosion of what one loves. I turned his world into a glass case slowly filled with water. I offered the journalist more details whenever she asked, carefully curated so that each new piece made his story more complex and less comfortable for the people who stood beside him. Investors started asking for withdrawal forms. A charity that had once been his temple asked him to step aside from the board. I watched him hand over tabs like a man who had been taught to relinquish only when the cost of retaining is greater than the cost of letting go. At home, the spaces became territories. I left things that belonged to other women in drawers he knew he had never shown to me. A hotel keycard wrapped in a receipt, a lipstick in the pocket of a sweater. I made sure the evidence was not damning. Legal prudence was my friend, but awkward enough to make his sleep light. He thought he could lie his way out by smiling and blaming stress. Lies are good lubricants for a while. They fail when applied to everything. One night I found a note he had written to himself on a napkin, hurried and desperate. Don't lose, I say. Don't tell, I say. The note looked like a child's prayer. I kept it. I folded it into my pocket like a promise. That note told me that beneath the varnish, he cared about the symmetry of life, that losing me would be less tolerable because I reflected his competence. Men like Adam, who measure themselves by polished mirrors, are vulnerable when the mirrors stop showing what they want. I escalated without cruelty. There was an ethic in my cruelty. I would not ruin a life I did not have to. My aim was correction, not annihilation. So I arranged for the things that hurt him the most to be public in a way that left no room for tidy denial. A board member leaked a dossier that cited the previous failures in numbers and dates. A client incidentally mentioned a dinner where Adam had misrepresented projections. A friend called, puzzled, and asked why Adam had stopped returning her calls. The network that had once supported him frayed. That is the important bit most stories omit. People do not fall because one person pushes them. They fall because the network around them stops catching them. I did not have to kill his reputation with a single blow. I simply made each rope fray. Adam's collapse was noisier than I expected. He began to drink in afternoons like someone trying to forget where he had parked his life. He became unpredictable. Heated rose in the apartment, slamming doors that made the whole building shiver like a small earthquake. I kept my distance when necessary. I let him feel the loneliness that had once been anesthetized by his ability to project a desirable image. When men who have managed everything are left with nothing, they turn on the quiet parts of themselves, and that is where the most dangerous things live. Fear, humiliation, and the old ache of being merely human. His desperation made him careless. He made an error. A vital one. He met Livia in the lobby of the hotel where he had thought to be discreet. He believed, stupidly, that the safety of being late at night in a public hotel gave him immunity. He was wrong. Livia had become a vessel of anger. She had spoken to a woman whose husband had also lost money in Adam's hedge fund misadventures. The woman had a lawyer. They had legal questions. They had an appetite for answers. 2 days after the hotel meeting, Adam walked into our living room with the entire expression of a man who had realized he was on stage and had forgotten his lines. He accused me of being cold. He said, "Isabella, what is wrong with you?" There was a madness in his accusation because it contained belief. The belief that being cold could be blamed not on consequence but on mood. I looked at him as one might look at an appended vase. Broken, but with a kind of crooked beauty. I told him I had seen him with Livia. He laughed like a man surprised by a joke. Then he said, "You're imagining things." The flicker in his eyes told me that my work had found its mark. He tried to fight back. Men like Adam have resources. He hired a crisis manager, a woman with bronze skin and teeth cut in exact currency. She called me polite, probing questions that were not questions. She asked for access to my phone. She asked for a list of my associates. I gave nothing. I answered with quiet. That quiet made her flinch. It made Adam furious. In his fury, he made a mistake he would not recover from. He spread rumors about me, about my fidelity, about my stability. He wanted me gone, not because he loved the idea of me but because he loved the idea that my pain could be the world's distraction from his shame. So I let him. When your opponent misdirects by attacking you, you become free to move where they cannot see. Adam's accusations were blaring, theatrical. He took meetings in which he painted me as hysterical, as irrational. He thought others would believe his narrative because it flattered their biases, because a smiling man who once did well could make himself the victim. He underestimated our age. He underestimated the people who could count. He underestimated the stubbornness of facts. Lena, the journalist, published again. This time she wrote not only about the financial matters but about the human cost, the mess in the life and the people. She interviewed Livia, who, heartbreakingly, answered with honesty about wanting to forgive but being unable. She interviewed investors who had felt betrayed. She did not mention me as a conspirator. She quoted me in small, devastating lines about truth and dignity. My voice in that piece was a blade not pointed at one man, but at the idea that someone could be allowed to insulate himself from consequence because of charm. The firm terminated Adam with immediate effect. When he tried to call me from the deserted echo of his life, his voice sounded the way it had on the first night he left for work and never came back. "I say," he said. "Please. I can fix this." He meant he could buy it, mend it, press the right palms. He was not accustomed to doors that did not open. I had prepared for that moment. I had set in motion the last part of my architecture. Reclamation. Revenge had never been my only aim. Restoration was the other. I wanted to be the woman who closed the book not with a scream but with a calm, unreadable bookmark. I called his mother first, because one must close with tenderness sometimes. She answered, voice full of a lifetime of other people's disappointments. I told her, in the same measured way I had told Livia, the things she deserved to know. She wept. The tears made her human in a way that the sun had never let her see. She asked if I would come over. I went. At his mother's apartment, I sat across from the woman who had removed a child no one could keep forever. She told me stories of a boy who loved model trains and who had cried when a lamp broke. She asked me why I had stayed. I told her the truth. That love, sometimes, is choosing to stay until the map is redrawn. She nodded. Then she held my hand, and in that simple clasp there was a confessional that belonged to all women. We do terrible things to keep ourselves, and we survive them. I did not seek his ruin for sport. I wanted the world to see what he had done, to understand the edges of a life that had sold ethics at the altar of convenience. I wanted him to wake in a quiet house and hear nothing but the sound of his own choices. He moved out the next week. The apartment we had once painted a pale, hopeful blue was stripped of his things like a site after an archaeological dig. Bits of him removed so carefully you could not tell what had been there before. He left a pair of cufflinks in a drawer. I kept them, not as trophies but as evidence, small cracked mirrors. He tried to rebuild. He called me months later from a country where the accent of his voice had shifted. He had taken a job with a firm that specialized in distant, moral ambiguities. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted to explain. I hung up. People ask me sometimes if I ever felt triumphant. They imagine champagne, a ritual of snapping closure. That is not how it is. Victory tastes, most often, like a slow, eerie silence. After 3 years of being an accomplice to my own small deceptions, after days of training my face to be pleasant while I orchestrated his fall, the final silence was small and exact. It fit into the spaces between thoughts like a clean shard. In the years after, I learned how to choose differently. I left the city for a while. I moved to a narrow house that smelled of pine and the sea. I studied the things that made me curious, literature and law, because I like to understand the mechanisms that make people accountable. I taught a seminar once on ethics and power. Men in suits sat unevenly in the chairs, hands folded like little pledges. I told stories, not about Adam, not by name, but about the way systems protect those who perform well, even when they harm others. I taught the students to be precise. Sometimes in late hours, I would think of him, Adam, alone in a cheap apartment somewhere in a city that not even his accent made instructive. I would imagine him trying to reconstruct himself like someone trying to staple a photograph back together. I would think of the small private ways people find to grieve themselves. There is an odd empathy I feel for him now because he was once young and earnest in a bad way. He was a person who forgot that kindness is a currency that compounds. And sometimes I would think of Livia, who eventually found someone who liked the softer things. Sunrise runs and slow Sunday markets. She married a man who liked her laugh and kept his hands in places that did not burn. She sent me a picture once years later, with a small note, "Thank you," it said. I kept that note too. Revenge, in the end, did not rebuild me. It only unblocked the path toward who I had been when I was free of illusions. I do not regret the architecture of what I built. I regret the necessity that built it. There are times I wish I could have been wilder, less cunning, more cataclysmic, but people like him teach you the value of patience. When I walk now down a street, I watch faces. I look for the cursive of irresponsibility, the flash of entitlement, the assumption of forgiveness. I smile in a way that is warm enough to be friendly but distant enough to be a strategy. I teach young women the arithmetic of autonomy. Invest in yourself so that no one else can privatize your losses. If you ask me now whether I am happy, I will tell you the truth. I am content. Contentment is not a fireworks display. It is a small light in a window that does not go out because you tend it. The night the world judged him, he lost his light in a public way. I lost mine privately for a while, as people do when ordered to choose between the parts that shine and the parts that hurt. But I found my light again. Isabella is a name I keep because it fits the woman I have chosen to be. Names are not fixed. They are promises. I promised myself not to be the person who let her life be decided by another's appetite. I promised to be the architect of my own silence and my own storms. So when you ask if I took revenge and won, understand this. Winning was never about being cruel. It was about re-establishing the boundary between what is yours and what belongs to someone else. It was about making a man who thought himself untouchable understand, by degrees and truths, that things he had believed secure were fragile. That is the end of the story. There is no dramatic scene of triumph, no villain burning in a bonfire while I dance under the moon. Instead there is the quiet of a life reclaimed, the careful mending of the small things, The deliberate choice to be someone who looks back and says, without hatred, I reclaimed what I was owed. Sometimes, at night, when the city breathes and the lights are a loose scatter of constellations, I take the napkin with his worried handwriting from my drawer and look at it. I think about all the promises we make to ourselves in private and how important it is to keep them. Then I tuck the napkin away, turn out the lamp, and sleep. I did not think about Adam for months at a time. This is an achievement you don't brag about, like learning to smell smoke and walk away without lifting the pan. I built a life with quiet angles. I kept a small house by the water and filled it with books that didn't lie. I let days pass without announcing themselves. I taught, wrote, read and slept. Then he returned, not with a knock, but with an echo. It began with small disruptions. My name, Isabella, turned up in a comment thread under an article I had written about consent and finance. The comment was smartly poisonous. You of all people should know how narratives are engineered. It was signed J. 2 days later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a single cufflink, not the pair he left, but its twin, the mate I had never found. Polished. Heavy. The type that remembers wrists and rooms. Under it, a card. You're missing something. A friend. I felt nothing cinematic. I felt my body catalog the details. Postmark. A city I had never lived in. The paper. Cheap, the kind used by companies trying to pretend at luxury. The scent. A ghost of cologne I once knew. He was alive in the method if not in the signature. I turned the cufflink in my fingers and thought about what I owed my past. Revenge had changed me. Victory had civilized my anger. I did not want to be dragged backward into a narrative where I was merely an instrument playing the same song. So I made a plan not for war, but for resistance. I spoke to Lena, the journalist. He's surfacing, I said. She didn't ask how I knew. She understood that certain men return the way a bad habit does, on schedule, disguised as an exception. He can't hurt what you've built, she said. But he can scratch its surface. I hired a locksmith to reinforce my doors. I backed up everything. I told 3 people where they could find copies of my important documents if anything happened. I did this without drama, as if refreshing a password. The next move was mine. I wrote to Jay. In the comment thread, 2 words. Nice try. Within a day, a new email appeared in my inbox, sent from a disposable address. January Ghost at Proton Mail. It said, meet me at Café Lento, Thursday, 7 p.m. If you don't come, you'll regret it. I didn't discuss it with anyone. I did something more old-fashioned. I showed up. Café Lento smelled of roasted beans, paperbacks, and weathered nerves. I chose a table near the window, my back to the wall. I wore something I could run in. The bell above the door chimed. A man walked in. Not Adam. Taller, leaner, with a careful face that kept its meaning on a leash. He sat down across from me without asking, as if he belonged in that chair. Isabella, he said, tasting my name like a caution. My name is Julian Hart. I'm an attorney. He laid a card on the table with the gravity of a confession. Hart and Barrow. A firm that did very well by men who didn't want to answer questions. I represent a client who believes you engineered a campaign of defamation against him, Julian said. He would like to settle this quietly. He didn't say Adam. The theater of omission. He was better at this than the crisis manager had been. Softer, more surgical. And if I decline? I asked. Then my client will pursue all available remedies, he said, that lawyerly lyric, and let the silence sit between us like a third party. Tell your client, I said, that truth doesn't defame. It describes. He studied me. Up close. His eyes were a meticulous gray, the kind that specialize in noticing what others misplace. You think you're prepared for what he becomes when cornered. I don't think, I said. I remember. He almost smiled. He asked me to deliver something. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside. Photographs. Not of me, not of him. Of a student from my seminar, 19, bright, sharp, her name circled in red ink on a class roster. Another photo. My house at night, the porch light a halo. Another. Lena, walking her dog. The message was obvious, primitive, effective. When did he give you these? I asked, even though I knew he would not answer. "I'm an attorney," he said. "I don't answer questions that aren't useful." "Then answer this," I said. "How much of yourself have you sold to him?" The question surprised him. He tapped a finger on the table. "An old habit, a tell in a silent game." "Enough," he said. "But not all." He stood. "I've done my part," he said. "Decide if you want to keep living in a house with windows." After he left, I sat in the hum of the cafe for 5 minutes, then 10, then long enough that the barista asked if I wanted a refill. I took the photographs, folded them small, and put them in my pocket next to the cufflink. Pairing threats with relics. On the way home, the sky held the color of wet slate. I walked, counted streetlights, and thought about the old story of the scorpion and the frog. Men like Adam don't return because they need to. They return because the river exists. At home, a new email waited, from Adam. Not disposable, not masked. His full name, his signature, a link to a life he was proud of once. The subject line was a theft of tenderness. "I say, talk to me. The body. You hurt me. Now I'm going to show you what hurt can be. It doesn't have to be this way." I did not respond. I created a new folder and dragged his message into it. I named the folder Evidence. I made tea and watched the steam vanish. The next days were quiet because the next move was calculation. He didn't want me to know where he was. He wanted me sleepless. I slept. But I also mapped the edges of his possible reach. Old colleagues, old clients, old habits. He had always preferred the glamour of proximity. Hotels, lobbies, lures. I checked cameras in my street. I paid cash for a second phone and put only 3 numbers in it. I taught my classes, graded, set an assignment that asked my students to analyze how a story is built when both sides insist the other is lying. On Friday, Lena called. "He approached me," she said, voice like a steady hand on a small glass. "At the park. He tried to charm the dog." The dog did not negotiate. "What did he want?" I asked. "To apologize," she said, then laughed. "And to threaten. He thinks those 2 verbs rhyme." I wanted to tell her to leave the city for a while, to go somewhere soft and unnamed. But Lena didn't run. Lena wrote. "If he escalates, I go to print," she said. "Not with rumor, with documentation." That night, the first real blow landed. I came home to find my door closed and locked, exactly as I had left it. Inside, nothing was broken. Nothing stolen. But every picture frame in the living room faced the wall, every book sat upside down, every chair rotated slightly so that nothing aligned. It looked like grief had come into the room and rearranged the furniture. On the kitchen table, a salt shaker, its cap off, a narrow white dune poured into a letter A. You may not believe me when I say that I laughed. Not loudly, just a small incredulous sound, because of course he would choose salt. Of course Adam, who once scented his life with little luxuries, would choose a symbol that stings a wound without causing it. I took photographs of everything before I touched a single thing. Then I swept the salt into a jar, screwed on the lid, and labeled it with the date. I did not call the police. The law is often a postscript for men like him, not a deterrent. Instead, I called Julian. "Tell your client," I said when he answered, "that trespass isn't a conversation starter." Silence. Then, "He warned me you'd be theatrical." "He rearranged my furniture," I said. "It's hardly opera." Julian exhaled in a way that might have been a yes. "May I come by?" he asked. "You think I'll let his lawyer into my home?" I said. "I think you'll let a man who's beginning to suspect he chose the wrong side look at the mess and decide whether he wants his suit to smell like smoke." He arrived half an hour later. He stood in the doorway and scanned, taking it all in with a precise contempt that wasn't aimed at me. "This is adolescent," he said. "And deliberate." "Deliberate is his religion," I said. He walked to the table, looked at the salt, and shook his head once, like someone grading a sloppy paper. "I can't fix him," he said. "But I can refuse to help him." "Why did you take him as a client?" I asked. "Because he paid," he said. "And because I thought the story you told about him made you biased." He looked at me. "I don't think that anymore." "Then withdraw," I said. "Today." "I can't," he said, "because ethics has leashes and they're attached to timelines." But I can slow him. I can advise him to avoid contact. I can make it expensive for him to be stupid. Do that, I said. And give him a message. If he comes for my students or my friends, I will file loudly with exhibits. He nodded. Then he made a second mistake, which turned out to be a gift. Isabella, he said at the door. He mentioned a name. Mara. Does that mean anything to you? The name was a match struck in a pantry. Mara had been a junior analyst at Adam's old firm, the kind whose brain caught numbers like butterflies and pinned them gently to a board. She had left after the scandal and vanished into a quiet job where numbers didn't bleed. She had also once sent me a message that read, "Thank you for turning on the light." Yes, I said. It means he's running out of allies. After Julian left, I made another list. Lines drawn, assets inventoried, vulnerabilities assessed. It was less a battle plan than a maintenance schedule for my sanity. The column titled What He Can Break had only 3 entries. Reputation, relationships, safety. Next to each, I wrote a counter. Documentation, transparency, surveillance. The next week he tried reputation. An anonymous blog published a clever piece suggesting that my investigative contacts were motivated by personal vendettas, that I had seduced sources to manufacture narratives. It was thin but sticky. People like gossip that flatters their cynicism about women who organize. I did not respond with a tweet storm or a thread. I wrote a measured essay for a reputable outlet about how whistleblowers are discredited, with examples, citations, and case law. I did not mention Adam. I didn't need to. The shape of him was visible inside the negative space. Then he tried relationships. Livia called me, voice bright with panic. He showed up at my work, she said. He apologized for everything. He said you took advantage of me. He said you ruined his life. What did you say? I asked. I told him I ruined my own life when I wanted the wrong thing, she said, steady now. And then I told him to leave. He wasn't used to women keeping their lines straight. It made him angry. Anger made him sloppy. Finally he tried safety. He followed me, twice, 3 times, always at a distance close enough to taste, far enough to deny. I didn't call out. I didn't run. I kept walking, turned corners, let him see that I knew he was there. Predators prefer when you pretend not to notice the teeth. That weekend, I left the city. Not to hide. To bait. I booked a room at the Cedar Strand Inn, a coastal hotel with halls that carried sound like secrets. I checked in under my own name. I placed the salt jar on the bedside table where the lamp would have been in a more sentimental story. I waited. At 2:14 a.m., someone tried my door. I was awake. Fear teaches you to hear new frequencies. The lock clicked once, twice, the soft metallic sound of a key that had no right to be in that lock. On the 3rd attempt I said calmly, "The camera sees you." Silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. I got up, crossed the room, and opened the door. The corridor was empty except for a man at the far end, turning the corner with a practiced shoulder. Tall. Expensive shoes. The profile I had known better than my own hand. I didn't follow. I did what he'd never expect. I called the front desk and said, "A guest is trying keys on doors. Call the police." Then I called Julian. "He's here," I said. Cedar Strand Inn. He tried my door. Julian swore softly. "Stay inside. I'm 10 minutes away." "You live 10 minutes from a coastal hotel?" I said, because humor is how I clean my hands after touching fear. "I was already driving," he said, which meant I was tailing him too. When the police arrived, they did not find Adam in the hall. They found him outside, by the service exit, talking to a woman in a staff jacket. I watched from the window as the scene took on an old familiarity. Adam smiling, hands open, the choreography of a man who sells solutions. The officers were polite the way people are to men who look like they know what's happening. Julian pulled in, got out, showed his bar card, and proceeded to do nothing visible and everything necessary. I did not go down. I did not give Adam what he wanted. The spectacle of us in the andante of disaster. In the morning, there was a note under my door. "Enjoy your salt." No signature. He could not help himself. He had to touch the prop. I took the note and drove home. Julian called from the road. Temporary restraining order, he said. I can get one. It won't change his nature, but it will give the police a sharper pencil. Do it, I said. The order arrived 3 days later. He violated it within 48 hours, of course, indirectly, digitally. A burner account posted a photo of me on the steps of my building with the caption, "Some lights never go out." The timestamp placed the photographer within the restricted radius. The police logged it. A new file opened with my name on it and his in the line marked respondent. Adam had once treated forms like talismans against consequence. Now they were blades pointed inward. While legal paper stacked up, I turned toward Mara. I met her in a library that always smelled like pencils and politics. She looked older only in the way that relief ages you. Less coiled, more real. He's called me twice, she said. He wanted me to sign something that said he never pressured projections. He said it would help him start over. I told him I don't sign what isn't true. He will try again, I said. And he will escalate to threats dressed as favors. Do you have counsel? She shook her head. I have a backbone. Good, I said. We'll get you a lawyer anyway. She smiled, small and fierce. You really don't stop, do you? I stop, I said. Just not when men with matches hover near dry wood. I did not keep trophies, only records. It's a superstition of mine. Objects carry hauntings. Facts carry leverage. When Adam left the city, I closed the folder with his name and put it in cold storage. Literally, a sealed envelope tucked behind the breaker panel of my narrow house. It was supposed to live there forever like a spent storm. The storm has a memory. He reappeared 2 years later in a small, deliberate way. It was the kind of return men like him prefer. A coincidence that isn't, a gentle bump of lives in a place where witnesses will think fate is romantic. I was walking out of a lecture on ethics and risk, students drifting around me with notebooks like shields, when I saw him across the street, not looking at me but standing so that I could not see him. He had lost the expensive looseness that had once defined him. His jaw was sharper. His suit was almost right, the way a forgery almost passes. The eyes were the same. The eyes wanted. I kept walking. He let me. 3 days later, a slender white envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single photograph of us from years ago, printed on thick paper, our mouths open in the laughter of people who have not yet met the bill. On the back in his cramped pen. You win. But games have sequels. I am not a person who startles easily. Fear for me is a checklist. I catalogued the obvious risks: stalking, harassment, reputational smear, legal nuisance, and then the non-obvious. Prodding at my work, nudging my students, setting small fires I would have to bend to put out. Misdirection is a common tactic. Make the target spend energy in circles. I do not walk in circles. I built a grid. Step 1. Contain the perimeter. I changed routines the way one changes locks. Routes, times, habits. When you refuse to be predictable, you starve your adversary of maps. Step 2. Open the old envelope behind the breaker and reacquaint myself with the landscape. Names, dates, the people who had touched his fall and might be touched again. Step 3. Audit my vulnerabilities. The soft spots were not where one expects. Not my job. Not my accounts. They were the people who had chosen to trust my version of the story, and the parts of me that still hesitated to fight brutally. I also called Lena, because every war requires a historian. She listened. Thoughtful. He will try to reframe, she said. Losers rewrite. Winners remember. She asked if I wanted to go public. Preempt the smear. I told her no. I preferred the needle to the megaphone. Adam's first move was almost tender. He sent flowers to my office, a poverty of imagination in a man who once could orchestrate entire weekends like an opera. The card read, "Closure." I had the building's cameras catalogued, and so I watched the footage that afternoon. He did not deliver them. A boy from a courier service did, board and chewing gum. Adam knew I would check. He wanted me to know that he knew how I think. The second move was smarter. A student, bright, careful, came to my office hours with a question that wasn't about ethics but about me. "Professor," she said, "there's a thread online. It says, you orchestrated a hit piece. That you sabotaged a man you were with and called it justice. It sounds," she searched for the word, Operatic. I smiled the way one does when a child shows you a rumor. The thread is bait, I said. Don't eat it. She nodded, embarrassed, and then asked the real question in her eyes. Is it true? I told the truth that matters. I documented a person's actions and let the math do the rest. After she left, I found the thread. It was posted under a pseudonym that thought itself clever. Amor 3AU, letters and numbers, disguised only enough to let him feel sly. The details were Baroque, the way a liar's overcompensation is Baroque. Alleged recordings, invented motives, a version of me with knives in her hair. The point wasn't the content. It was the fog. When you thicken the air, everyone coughs, and while they cough you move. I did not respond. I archived every post, captured the metadata, and traced the network of accounts it cross-pollinated. 5 were empty husks. 3 connected to a cluster in a different city. 1, gratifyingly, linked back to a burner phone registered 2 towns over. I bought a train ticket. The shop where the burner had been purchased smelled like rubber and cheap heat. The clerk did not remember the guy, but he remembered the card. It was prepaid. I checked the camera over the register and saw, in a grain of pixels, a silhouette I knew too well. The tilt of the head, the caution that pretends to be nonchalance. I took the footage home. A friend ran enhancement. It was him. We do not skip to the end. We move through a maze because the walking is the proof you understand the design. He called at last, from a number that, when I answered, fed me only his breath for 3 seconds before his voice arrived, shaped and intimate. I say, he said. He didn't deserve that nickname anymore, but he used it the way burglars use a key they never returned. You wanted my attention, I said. You have it. Use your words. I want to talk, he said. No audience. No articles. No theater. You brought a theater, I said. You're standing on your own stage. A pause, as if he could taste me through the wire. Meet me, he said. Tonight. The old gallery. I almost laughed. The gallery was gone. The lease had been devoured by a taller building with mirrored windows that pretended to be the sky. But the cafe next door remained, new name, same peppermint tea. He was betting on nostalgia to dilute my aim. Nostalgia makes you sentimental. Sentiment is friction. Tomorrow, I said. Daylight. A park bench where we can be boring and obvious. I named a park with cameras on every gate. He hesitated. Fine, he said. But leave the knives at home. I don't carry knives, I said. I carry mirrors. The next day was clean blue and public. He sat before I arrived, posture erect like someone performing remorse. In person, the damage was clearer. The suit was not the wrongness. The face was. It had acquired the puffy certainty of someone who drinks to sleep and wakes to a mouth of coins. He smiled softly, like he could be new. Men often believe in the possibility of their newness because they find it easy to forget the old. I'm building something, he said. A fund offshore. Compliant. Small but growing. I have clients who still know value when they see it. I want to make amends. With me? I asked. With the story, he said. With the way my name works in rooms. Names are earned, I said. You spent yours. Help me, he said. Simple. As if the years between us were a curtain I could tug aside. You're good with patterns. Guide me. Quietly. I'll pay. There it was, the oblique pivot. Men who have injured you will ask to hire your mind to mend their public. They prefer your intelligence once it's denatured, dehydrated of its memory. I'm not for sale, I said. And neither is the past. He leaned back. The softness dropped from his mouth. Then we're enemies, he said, almost relieved to have named the thing. And enemies deserve honesty. I know what you did to me. I know who helped you. I know the journalist. I know the timing. I can reconstruct a campaign from hints. You can, I said. But can you prove it? A flicker. He wasn't sure if I would care about proof. He should have known me better. Proof is the only religion I attend. I don't need to, he said, recovering. I need only to sow doubt. People love a woman's vengeance when it's fiction. In life they find it abrasive. If I put the right doubts in the right ears, your job can become a hobby. Your students can become casualties. Your friends can become bored of defending you. Are you ready to be that woman forever? Yes, I said, and I watched him search my face for the feint. He changed tactics. It doesn't have to be this way, he said, soft again. I miss you. You miss control, I said. And the parts of me that decorated your narrative. He blinked, and in the blink I saw the boy his mother had described, crying over a broken lamp. It's a dangerous thing, empathy. It opens a door to surrender. I closed it. We parted with formal politeness, the way diplomats part before wars they will pretend are avoidable. He left behind a paper coffee cup, the lip darkly marked. I considered the DNA trapped in that brown rim and felt, for the first time, tired. He struck harder a week later. Not me directly. My students. An anonymous complaint landed with the dean, alleging bias, retaliation, professional misconduct. It was dressed in the precise syntax institutions fear, and though it lacked substance, it had the weight of language that knows procedures. It forced an inquiry. I conformed to the inquiry with devotion. I answered every question as if I were paying a debt I'd never incurred. While I did, Adam spread a different kind of rumor in a different part of my life. He visited my mother. He chose a Sunday afternoon, the time of week when old women put on pot water for tea and talk to anyone who knocks because it makes the house feel young. He brought flowers. He remembers how to color a scene, and introduced himself by the old harmless title, Isabella's friend. He must have looked sincere. She called me after he left, voice bright, like a girl who had stumbled over a past and found it alive. He seems wounded, she said. He said he just wanted peace. She used the word gentle. I wrote that down in the margin of my anger. I do not escalate by halves. If he wanted theater, I would build a proscenium he couldn't see from his seat. First, I mapped the satellite orbiting him, the lawyer he used to threaten, the crisis manager he paid to polish, the men who thought a return would be a proof of their own merciful sophistication. One of them, Callum, liked to host salon dinners where strangers performed intelligence over charred octopus. Callum had been the type to say, cancel culture with a sigh, as if consequence were barbaric. Adam was on his guest list for a Thursday. I was invited by way of a mutual friend who thought I might enjoy civil discourse. Civil discourse is a lovely phrase. It implies two sides need only share silverware to find agreement. It ignores mass and friction. I arrived early and quiet, in a dress that let me disappear by design. Adam arrived late and luminous. He held court successfully for 20 minutes, saying not much, making people feel like they did. He referenced books he hadn't finished. He parried questions about ethics with the firm jaw of someone who has learned the shape of contrition. Then I asked him, across olives and candles, a simple thing. What safeguards, I said lightly, does your new fund have in place to ensure conflict of interest doesn't replicate past concerns? A hush, the kind that makes spoons pause. He smiled. We have oversight. Of what? I asked, still pleasant. And by whom? He named a compliance firm that exists but did not work for him. I knew this because I had already spoken to them. The compliance officer, sharp, dry, had told me, we considered it. We declined. I let his lie hang a moment, then tilted my head like a bird hearing a false note. That's odd, I said. They told me the opposite. I pulled out my phone, thumbed to the email, and slid it to Callum, whose love of spectacle was only outmatched by his love of certainty. He read, then looked at Adam with the expression an investor wears when he realizes the graph is upside down. Adam recovered. Poorly. He made an excuse about preliminary talks, then blamed an underling for miscommunication. The table moved on, but the mood shifted. The oxygen in the room acquired a metallic edge. People remember such edges. They file them under instinct. That same night, I sent a packet, discreet, well-labeled, to a mid-tier regulator in a country where Adam had ferreted away a shell company. The packet contained what he might call minutiae, repeated IP addresses across different entities, PDF author names that betrayed their compiler, a sequence of deposits that, alone, looked like noise but together formed a melody of avoidance. I did not accuse. I asked questions that sounded like the beginning of a seminar. What is the relationship between X and Y? Bureaucracies love questions shaped like homework. They assign them. People answer. He sensed the pressure before the letters arrived. That is a thing predators and architects share. Sensitivity to currents. He came to my house at midnight. He didn't knock loudly. He pressed his palm against the door and spoke through the wood like a ghost trying to re-enter its life. "Isabella," he said. "Enough." His voice had the crackle of someone who had been drinking the kind of clear liquor that makes endings feel optional. I opened the door because this is the part where many women die, and I wanted to choose the script. He stood on my porch with rain peppering his shoulders into darker shapes. He looked for a moment, tired enough to be forgiven by someone else. "You have to stop," he said. "You're making a mistake." "I rarely do," I said. "But I catalog them when I do for study." "You want me ruined," he said. "You want me dead." "I want you irrelevant," I said. "Death is a shortcut. Irrelevance takes rigor." He stepped closer, his face the intimate distance of old misused summers. "You loved me," he said. "Some part of you still does." "Some part of me loves what I learned cleaning up after you," I said. "Discipline. Patience. A standard of proof. Not you." He said something then that was both stupid and vile. He said he could make people believe I had stalked and entrapped him. He said he could say I had fabricated documents. He said, finally revealing the raw thing beneath the rhetoric, that he would hurt me until I asked him to stop. I smiled. It wasn't kind. "Ask," I said. "But do it under oath." He flinched. The word oath still had weight to him, the way certain churches still smell of childhood. He left. I watched him go down my path, a figure diminishing into rain. Then I closed the door and did the unglamorous thing. I wrote everything down. Quoted. Timed. Recorded the weather. Stored the file in 3 places, one of them analog. A week later, the regulator wrote back, dry and expectant. They had, by then, opened a preliminary inquiry. They wanted interviews. They wanted to know who else had seen what. "Please provide," the email said, "any contemporaneous records." I provided only what I could vouch for without question. I provided nothing that would paint me as a vigilante. I let their machinery chew. Adam counterpunched with a suit. Civil, loud, performative. The claim accused me of defamation, interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It named Lena as a conspirator. It was filed in a jurisdiction chosen for its friendliness to the rich and thin-skinned. He wanted discovery to be a weapon. He wanted me to look like the woman his thread had described. I hired a lawyer whose hobby was silence. She read the complaint the way a surgeon reads a scan. "He's begging for sunlight," she said. "Let's give him a slow noon." We filed a response that was a study in restraint. Factual, dry, threaded by an argument that pointed to truth as a shield and malice as a burden he would fail to carry. We asked the court to bring in his financials. We asked for communications he would hate to disclose. We asked for the burner phones. On the record, he was charming. Off the record, he was messy. The discovery process is a sieve. It catches anything that can't swim. His emails arrived in my counsel's portal with the sad clunk of old guilt. There were lines that would never see a jury because we would likely never get there, but they were enough to color the negotiation that would follow. Lena, for her part, did not cower. She published nothing new. She let the old work stand and the new filings speak in their ugly bureaucratic cadences. The court of public opinion grew bored, as public courts do, but the institutional ones did not. The regulator escalated from preliminary to formal. The letter used capital letters in ways that make men sit down. Adam's world began to wobble again. He bled clients while pretending to be solvent. He called me from a conference room I could hear in the echo, saying we should end this mutually. He offered an apology with no nouns. "We both made mistakes," he said. "We're both complicated." He wanted me to be his mirror again. 2 people, equally flawed, creating a shape that absolved. "No," I said. "This isn't symmetry. It's arithmetic." That was when he broke the rule he had been obeying without admitting it. He came at me directly. Not with fists. With narrative. He published an essay under his name in a glossy magazine that has a fondness for redemption arcs when the arc is shaped like a man. The essay was about the cost of reinvention. It named me, lightly changed, as a former partner who weaponized shame. It did not lie outright. It was too well lawyered, but it redrew the map so that the path to my house looked like a path to his ruin. It worked for a week. Strangers wrote me notes, some kind, some gleefully cruel.
A colleague asked if I'd considered a leave. I did not rage. I sharpened.
The controlled burn looks, from a distance, like a wildfire until you see the fire breaks.
I built 3.
The first was forensic. I engaged a private examiner to audit the provenance of Adam's essay. The examiner found drafts in a cloud folder that had been shared with the crisis manager and 2 men whose job titles all contained the word brand. The drafts included passages cut at the last minute, passages that named people by name, passages that threatened without artistry. We did not need the passages themselves. We needed the timestamps. I delivered those to the regulator to show intent, pattern, and the continued willingness to mislead. The second was legal. My lawyer filed an anti-slap motion, the kind that forces a plaintiff to prove probability of prevailing before dragging someone through a swamp. The motion quoted the essay's evasions and matched them, one by one, to provable events. It asked the court to penalize the suit for being what it was, a performance. The third was human. I visited Adam's mother. It was not theater. It was a thesis. She opened her door with the wary hope of someone who prepares for grief by cleaning the living room. We sat. I told her carefully what he had done recently. I told her what he was doing to me. I told her the cost. She listened with a ferocity that felt like prayer. At the end she said, "He was not born like this." It was not an excuse. It was a map. She called him that night, and I know this because he left me a voicemail after midnight, raw, abusive, the words of a man unmasked by someone he cannot charm. "You went to her," he said, and the "you" was a blade. I kept the voicemail. I kept everything. There was a hearing on the motion 2 months later, in a courtroom that smelled of dust and old air. Adam came looking like remorse in tailored wool. He did not look at me. The judge, polite and dry, asked questions about facts. My lawyer treated each question like a step on a comb. Adam's counsel tried tone. The judge preferred arithmetic. We prevailed. The suit in that jurisdiction died. Fees, modest but pointed, shifted onto him. It wasn't a victory drum. It was a metronome. He still had one piece left to play. Desperation dressed as romance. He wrote me a letter, not email, not text, on heavy paper, in ink that smudged where his hand had hesitated. It was the only honest artifact he'd produced in years. He apologized for things not as categories but as events. He named dates. He named Livia. He named the hotel. He named, softly, his fear of becoming ordinary. He said he had started to dream of train tracks and couldn't tell if he was on them or standing beside them while a train approached. I could have answered. I could have sent back a note that said, "I hear you. I wish you well. Stay away." I did not. I put the letter in a folder labeled, "Sentimental Evidence," and left it there in case a future required it. The regulator concluded at last with the outcome I had predicted but never said aloud. A sanction, public, a ban, time-limited but career-meaningful, a fine that was more story than some. He had to stand in front of a small camera in an office that had no sympathy and say words he did not like. He did it. He had to hear his name paired with phrases like, failure to disclose, and improper representations. He heard it. He had to send letters to clients that were more honest than any he had ever written. He sent them. He vanished again after that, but only the way a stain vanishes after 3 wash cycles. Lighter, quieter, still there in certain lights. I returned my life to its measured hum. I taught my classes. I went home by different routes only out of habit. People for a while tried to make my story into a parable. They asked what revenge had tasted like. I told them it tasted like paperwork. Months later, I saw him one last time, not because he asked, but because I arranged it. Call it epilogue. Call it audit. Call it the last mirror. I invited him to a museum. Public, winterbright, the kind of place that makes people whisper even when they are alone. I stood in front of a painting that was a storm on a canvas and waited. He arrived on time. He looked empty but upright, like a ship that had lost its name but not its keel. "Why am I here?" he asked. Not angry. Curious the old way. "To say goodbye," I said. "Properly. With nouns." He nodded. We stood a long minute looking at someone else's tempest. He spoke first. "You won." "I told you once," I said. "Winning was never about cruelty. It was about boundary." He swallowed. Then, "I almost died this year."
He didn't dramatize. Just placed it on the table between us like a cracked cup. Not by my hand. By neglect.
I woke up in a hospital with a tube in my arm and a nurse who called me sir, in a way that made me feel like no one.
I'm glad you didn't, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it.
You will never forgive me, he said.
I used to think I could earn it by performing the right sequences. Now I just want to understand the shape of it. It isn't a shape, I said.
It's the absence of one.
He exhaled.
We walked the gallery once, silent, the way people do when they decide not to inventory their past because it would take too long and hurt too much. At the door, he said, "If I stay away, is that enough?"
There was a boy in that question, asking if cleaning his room would fix the house.
"It's the minimum," I said. "And all I'll ever require of you."
He left. I watched him step into a day that, to him, must have felt like thin ice. He did not look back. The story doesn't end with thunder. It ends with administration.
The dean closed the inquiry with a letter that said, elegantly, unsubstantiated. The magazine that printed his essay ran a small correction the size of a coaster, admitting to a sourcing error. The regulator posted its final notice to a database read mostly by people who believe in forms. Callum threw a different kind of dinner where people talked about films instead of absolutions. I kept the letters and the voicemails and the paper cup, not as trophies but as a curriculum. Sometimes, when a student asks me what justice looks like when courts are tired and people are slippery, I tell them. It looks like a ledger. It looks like a patient woman with a folder. It looks like a person who refuses to put down the pen when the other person picks up the violin. If you want the cinematic version, here it is. I stand by my window at night and the city arranges itself into constellations that will never bear our names. I hold the old napkin with his frantic handwriting in one hand and the new letter in the other, and I feel nothing like triumph and nothing like pity.
I feel the cold, clean air of a boundary that holds. I go to sleep. In the morning, I will wake and make coffee and read.
I will return to the quiet ethics of ordinary days. I will forget on purpose the shape of his laugh, the way it opened feral. I will remember only the lesson, that some fires you smother and some you let burn in a ring you set yourself, so the forest can grow back.
He will live. I will live better.
And if one day, years from now, I receive another slender envelope with someone else's attempt at a sequel, I will open a new folder and label it with the date. And then I will do what I have always done. I will make a list, I will build a grid, and I will win without becoming what I fight.
That is my cold triumph. It is not a crown. It is a lock that clicks. A light that stays on. A house with records kept in order.
A life, finally, that answers to no one's appetite but my own.